how did you end up in business aviation?
I actually started out at Boeing in commercial and flight test and marketing, and I was always from the East Coast, so I found a way to get back to the East Coast because Dassault Falcon Jet was hiring. So I actually spent 20 years as the head of marketing in that company.
I was actually fortunate enough to have my godfather be the aviation director for United Technologies Corporation, and since my dad worked for the company, I had standby privileges to fly in their 737 and 727 when I was a kid, riding in the cockpit, and I thought, that's what I'm going to do with my future.
Yeah, and my mom was a 30-year employee retiree of Delta, or Northwest got me into it, and then I went to the University of North Dakota, wanted to learn how to drive planes, and my path changed, so I'm here.
So I've been with Textron 8 years, and just came across the aviation in the last 2 years. So learning it fast and enjoying it.
Okay. Is number 5 working? Okay, I'm on 6. Okay, so we've had 2 presentations already. Brian, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you score the US business jet market in 2018?
Yeah, I'd have to split that in 2. We've heard some evidence today that the used market's doing pretty well. New business jets, though, has been flat for 7 years, just the same number of deliveries, essentially. In fact, for any statistical geeks out there, I looked at the standard deviation over 7 years of deliveries, and it's only 23 units. So if you want to be a rocket scientist at your own company, just look at last year's deliveries, which were 676, and either add 23 or subtract 23, and that's what it'll be for 2018.
So sorry, it's too clever for me. Going back, so you think every year deliveries go up by 23 units?
No, they stay within a band of 23 units, up or down, very flat.
Since 2009?
Yeah, for 7 years straight.
Okay. Don, score out of 10?
I'd go with an 8 out of 10. On the aircraft management side, we're seeing a significant number of new owners entering the market for a host of reasons, whether it's price point, whether it's bonus depreciation, whatever it happens to be. On the charter side, there's a whole host of people like Wheels Up and Fly Victor and everybody else that's entering the market in a digital space that's being disruptive and also helpful to growing that segment of the market.
When you say you're seeing new owners, are you also seeing a trend of large corporations outsourcing flight departments?
No, not really. There's some that are out there that, and I wouldn't say it's necessarily corporations. I would say it's mostly driven by people that have flight departments that have a very senior aviation director that has always run it, and they decide they're going to retire and they don't have a succession plan, so they're trying to figure out what's going to be our next step, and they'll often come to a management company for some support.
Chris, out of 10?
Yeah, I think 8 out of 10 is a good number. I don't want to go for the perfect 10 out of 10. It's been a good year. I mean, inventory levels are low, pricing's holding. Our fear as being aircraft resellers is the amount of inventory we're going to have to actually sell next year, which has put us in a position, I think, to buy more airplanes. We're seeing a lot of owners wanting to trade. We've never taken as much inventory in, and that's kind of creating our opportunity for next year, is through the purchase.
I'd have thought Jetcraft, the standard answer had to be 10, regardless.
All right, 10.
Neville?
I'm going to go with 8 out of 10 as well. When you look on the pre-owned side for Textron, very busy, low-time aircraft coming in, move fast. On the new side, we see a lot more momentum this year to last year. The last 2 quarters have been extremely strong, and that's what we see going forward as well.
Okay, so the audience has been voting, and the lowest we have is 5. And most seem to be around the 8% is the 33%. It's juggling too much. So Brian, I'm going to start with you again. So 8's good. 5 years ago, we would never have gotten it 8, maybe 5. What's the main driver?
There's a number of things right now, but we have to remember that in the U.S. is really the center of gravity for business aviation. Two-thirds of the world's fleet of active business jets are based in the U.S. So what goes well in the U.S. goes well in the industry, and it's undoubtedly a very strong economy right now.
Chris, is it tax changes or?
Yeah, I mean the tax reform is a big thing for us here in the U.S. I think also the value of the pre-owned product, or that 5-year to 10-year airplane, is really driving some of these buyers to focus pre-owned versus new. But I think it's value in the tax reform, and it's going to be harder to find good supply inside the U.S., and that's going to drive activity in Europe and Asia. Asia's pre-owned market is actually a market now. They're learning how to sell pre-owned airplanes, which they didn't have that market 3 or 4 years ago.
Neville?
So, from our side, businesses are doing well. They're earning a lot of money, so they have money to spend, but definitely the tax laws this year have made a big difference. Every second customer coming in is going, I have a need, bonus depreciation, I need to buy an aircraft.
And just a little caveat to that, though. I put a little graphic on my LinkedIn page a couple days ago, and the Gamma folks report first half of deliveries of 2018, and I compare that to 2017, and they were up. But we have to remember that in 2016, the Cirrus SF-50 Vision Jet began delivering. That's a very low-value, single-engine jet. 36 of them equals one Gulfstream G650 as far as value goes. And if you were to remove those deliveries from first half 18, we're actually down 8% in business jet deliveries compared to the first half of 17.
Don?
I think just the overall macroeconomic condition where, business is great, people are making money. Business aviation is a way to improve your business. It's also a luxury item, so for people that are out there that are doing very well, in the used market, if they can find something from an inventory perspective that meets their need, I think people are feeling pretty good about the overall situation, and that's great for our business.
Okay, you operate aircraft, which is, much harder job than most of the other people on the planet.
It's the hardest.
Sorry?
It's the hardest.
Yeah, definitely harder than pre-owned broker. Sorry, Chris. What are your biggest challenges? We've already touched on the pilot problem. We've touched on infrastructure issues. What do you think are the real challenges facing you today?
I think probably two of them stick out the most. The first one is there are so many new first-time owners entering the market that we're seeing that are coming for aircraft management services because they don't know what they're doing, frankly, when they're buying this piece of equipment, and they get 6, 8, 12 months into it, and they realize how expensive it is, and they I'll say fail to recognize the fact that, maybe there was a G4 that was out there that was, 34 million new, and they bought it for 3.4, and it cost 3.4 to operate. And they didn't understand that it was going to be an ongoing 3.4. So that's a challenge to make sure that the owners are educated. And the second one is the staffing situation in our industry is very, very difficult, from pilots to maintenance technicians across the board. And I just see what's happening in our future with the new products being delivered by Gulfstream, Bombardier, and Embraer in the next 18 to 36 months, and we're not producing pilots fast enough in the world that we live in to fly those large cabin airplanes around the world.
It's interesting though, isn't it? Because I think we always tend to focus probably too much on pilots and not enough on engineers. But at one point we're saying there's a massive pilot shortage, and then at the next stage we're going, we won't need pilots in 10 years.
Right, I think so. I think we're in a situation right now where if you're a pilot, it's a great time to be a pilot and enjoy it, because 15 years from now you might be unemployed. Or we're only going to need half, because there's only going to be one pilot per airplane and not two.
So would you advise, if a 21-year-old came to you now and said, I want to become a pilot, what would you say?
I would say get engaged in this industry, because it's a fantastic industry and business to be in, but keep your options open. I mean, we just heard Michael talk about what's going to happen in the future of the VTOL aircraft, and who knows what that's going to be. The way Amazon is going, all the malls could be vertiports 20 years from now.
Neville, What's the biggest challenge you face or as an OEM or getting deals closed?
Say that again?
What's the biggest challenge you face, and what stops deals from closing?
From our side, I suppose at the end of the day, I would say financing sometimes becomes the issue. So when customers there, they think they have the finance, but trying to get the finance done at the final step may not be there, would probably be the biggest hurdle for us that we see today.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of buyers with cash. There's plenty of financing options. Our biggest hurdle is just, good inventory, good pedigree aircraft, here within the United States. Getting a buyer to focus their attention outside the boundaries of the U.S. is a big thing for a first-time buyer to get their heads around. I think more are becoming capable of doing that because simply there just aren't options. With the low inventory we have now in a lot of situations when we're bringing an aircraft to the market, we either have it pre-sold or we have multiple offers. So buyers getting their heads around that it's no longer a buyer's market has been a big challenge for a lot of them mentally.
And so these challenges as far as the entire industry is concerned, we can't forget emerging markets. At one time during the financial crisis, they really carried the torch for us, and about a third of deliveries went to emerging markets. That's completely changed now. Maybe 15% of deliveries go there, and if you look at the number of countries that are now in bear markets in their stock markets, it includes little countries like China, Turkey, Argentina, so there's a lot to come from behind. Also wanted to point out, Michael began speaking about it, about the sky-high stock markets right now and corporate profits being high. So why aren't they buying business jets? It used to be completely correlated. The more profits went up, the more jets they bought. But now what these squirrely corporations are doing is buying back stock instead of spending them on a capital asset. So that's setting back the industry a little bit.
So the biggest challenges for first-time buyers are understanding the costs, finding pilots. Am I missing anything for first-time buyers?
Inventory, actually finding an airplane.
Great. Let's talk about second-time or third-time buyers. If you bought a jet 5 years ago, you've seen a lot of depreciation on that asset. Is that putting people off? Have we lost anyone, or have people just taken that? Chris?
I think maybe if you bought a new jet, on the pre-owned side, if you bought a 5-year-old aircraft, there haven't been, we're not seeing the sharp declines that we saw 2 or 3 years ago. We're having quarter over quarter book $1 million losses. So, the value, still the value proposition on the pre-owned side is there. The second-time buyer, if they bought a new airplane, those are your candidates to buy, other new aircraft now. Those are the types that we're targeting to buy outside the United States as well, because there is a lot of good opportunity, and not having to get them around the ownership costs, the crewing, the whole concept of being an aircraft owner. Oh, and then you have to go to China to buy an airplane that you've never seen. So those are the ones that can get their heads around it.
Don, your customers, what's their, your long-term customers, what's their biggest frustration? Is it depreciation? Is it maintenance downtime? That's something I hear a lot of moaning about from owners, that you buy a jet and then you discover it's not always available.
Yeah, some of it depends on the piece of equipment that they have. If they got a good deal on something that was a one-off in the market, and now they're trying to sell it back into the market and it's a one-off, there's some frustration that, builds with some of those customers. But for the most part, we operate a large cabin fleet of reasonably new airplanes that turns over, around the 7-year mark. So people haven't experienced, the massive decline on, in that period for the most part. There's been some, but most of our corporate customers anyway plan for that.
Brian?
Yeah, these folks look at it, fortunately, from the micro level and how it affects their clients. I tend to back up and look at the macro level. And business jets got a pass for a long time. They didn't depreciate like a capital good. And I blame that on supply and demand. There wasn't enough supply, so that kept the residual values up. But guess what? They're capital good. They're supposed to depreciate like an airliner, like a car over time. And now we're seeing normal depreciation, not something fantastic to our industry. We're just becoming more like other capital goods.
Okay, Michael touched on this with the Praetor. There's a lot of very exciting new aircraft coming along the Longitude. Are you seeing a new aircraft effect, Neville? Is it all about new models with customers?
I would say yes. When you look at the Latitude, for example, and take that as an example. So I would say yes. So when you look at the Latitude, for example, that came out here in the last few years. The reaction from our customer base has been incredible, and we're seeing the similar thing with the Longitude. So we find when we invest back into our products, our customers react, and that drives sales and drives customer satisfaction as well.
Brian?
Yeah, again, on the macro scale, my own forecast for business jet deliveries start to come up a little bit next year, and that's because of the the emergence of new products. What are there, 7 or something coming on the horizon? And whenever you have new products come in, it really stirs the market and causes some excitement. So that's a good thing going forward.
Chris?
Yeah, well, I think the OEMs are taking the approach that, there are a lot of new products coming out. That's what the consumers want, and, hopefully we have enough momentum to carry all of those new products. So, they're making a bet on the next, 5 to 10 years, and, we'll ride the coattails of that, so.
Do any buyers just come to you going, when I looked at all the options, it's just too complicated? There's 57 different aircraft in production now or something. Do you think there's too many, or is choice good?
I think choice is really good, and it isn't too often where you go, they're overwhelmed by the amount of options. They have their mission, they have their range, they have where they want to go, and there's a certain segment that and price point that's going to fit that whole mission. So, no, the confusion of how many new products there are, I think there's a lot of excitement that they have the options.
Don, your customers tend to like new aircraft, don't they? Are you seeing excitement or?
Yeah, I would say there's excitement in the marketplace when we have customers that are trying to figure out, okay, what's my aircraft, what's my mission outside of the, 1/100th of 1% that say, I'm going to buy the top end of the market even though I only go between, New York and West Palm Beach. That's the airplane that I want, so that's what I'm going to buy. Most of the customers are much more pragmatic about what's my mission going to be, and the more opportunities that are out there, it's great for them, it's great for us. The challenge that we have with some of that is when new equipment comes into the marketplace, are there enough training slots? Is there enough supplemental crew? Everything that goes along with that. So once in a while, we'll get some questions about that. Hey, I'm going to be, this airplane is just entering the market. What are going to be the challenges of, staffing this thing? What are the challenges associated with, the maintenance of new aircraft entering the market? And all those normal things that happens when a new piece of equipment enters our space.
As someone supporting the fleet, would you prefer manufacturers to deliver better throughout the year so we don't see so many coming for calendar checkups in the fourth quarter?
Yeah, certainly anytime that the business is more level, it's much easier to deal with from, spikes that happen all over the place, particularly in the fourth quarter when, the FAA wants to shut its doors around, December 15th, and we have customers that say, I absolutely need to do, a business trip on this aircraft before the end of the year, and we're having those conversations now about the aircraft's going to deliver in, the first week in December, and we have, basically 10 days to get this thing in service, otherwise you're not going to meet the requirement that you have.
Okay, we have a question from the audience, an anonymous one. While depreciation has become the new norm, are there any bright spots, segment or model, that have actually appreciated with limited supply?
Yeah, I think, just to name a couple, Challenger 300s have been extremely hot lately. 605s, that market segment, that mid to large market segment, older than 5 years has been performing pretty well. I think Brian said, the 5-year-old a G550 at lower 20s provides a great value proposition. There's a lot of those markets right now: Falcon 2000s, G450s, G550s, at $10 to $20 million range. There's really no good supply in the U.S., and we've actually seen some appreciation in pricing over the last year.
I'd argue depreciation's the new norm. There'll be exceptions to it, like a brand new, clean sheet airplane that comes out with a, 5-year waiting list. Someone will make out okay on that. But as a whole, we should plan going forward for, 50% depreciation in 5 years or so.
Okay, we've got another question, quite specific. Where will the airliner conversion market go, CRJ and ERJ in particular? Who wants that? Don't jump. Don, you convert.
I don't see that really going anywhere, honestly. I think that I just don't see the need that the business aviation space has in the wherewithal to go out there and, buy these used CRJs and, convert them when there's so many choices that we were just talking about in the marketplace that's going to meet their need and be a lot less hassle than taking an airliner and trying to convert it into a business jet that may or may not meet their need. And then you end up in this situation where, I have one of these one-offs in the market that I converted, and now I'm going to try to sell it into the market after I just put a lot of money into a new interior in it.
Yeah, I'd argue it's a very niche product, the reconditioned regional jet, if you will. And at the end of the day, it's not a real business jet. It requires more runway. It doesn't fly as high over the weather. It's generally not as fast. But for shuttle operations or something, once in a while, there's a need.
Yeah, we tried it a couple times about 10 years ago. Gave it a good run, but that's really not where our attention is going to be focused probably ever again.
Okay, so Don's, or I'm not sure that's the answer the person wanted. Don, you've already touched on the fact it's going to be a very busy fourth quarter, and I think everyone in the room will agree with that. Neville, what's 2019 going to be like?
I'm going to be very optimistic about 2019. I think it's going to be a great year. We're already seeing at Textron a lot of orders flowing into 2019. Some backlog for certain models are going really well. So right now I'm going to say 2019 is going to be really strong.
Chris?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's a lot of year-end buyers this year that are trying to take advantage of the tax reform and the tax incentives that aren't simply going to be able to get their purchases in this year. Don't see a lot of change next year. I think the first 2 quarters, we're gonna, it's going to be the stuff we didn't get into 2018. We're gearing up for another busy year. Our problem is going to be the inventory and the supply.
Yeah, I see there's there should be some good follow through in 2019. Following that, though, there's still a boogeyman out there that people have to keep an eye on. A typical average U.S. expansion lasts 5 years, and that's the average since World War II, basically. We're pushing almost double that. It's almost been a 10-year expansion. There's only been one longer expansion, and that was 91 to 01, and we're almost up to that and passing it. So we're kind of in a strange place right now, and something worth keeping an eye on after 2019, I believe.
I would agree with that. I think, 2019, I anticipate it's going to start strong, but I think we're one, disruptive activity somewhere in the world to create a change to the overall economic situation, and I think it's going to be in Q3 of this year.
Q3 of next year?
Of 2019.
29 is when the downturn is coming.
Mm-hmm.
That's really, it's very optimistic.
Not really, but I'd say I hope it doesn't happen, but like Brian said, it's out there somewhere, given how long we've been expanding.
I was also going to say it's very specific. People usually fudge it, so it's great.
I was just throwing it out there because when we're here next year, you can say, I can't believe that you were right.
Yeah, Q3 next year. Chris, what date? What day?
A downturn or a leveling or the recession? I mean, what's the question?
When is the downturn?
The downturn? October 31st, 2019. No, I'm kidding. No, I mean, we feel that things are going to level off, and with the way that we make our, specific to our business and the investments we're making in inventory, we're going to start moderating that a little bit in the first quarter, in preparation that there is going to be a slight, leveling or downturn at the end of next year.
Neville, you were very optimistic, which is, I think, possibly the first time I've heard an OEM put very in front of optimistic as opposed to cautiously.
I should have said cautiously. Yeah. Thank you for picking up on that.
You're more optimistic. This is always very hard for a publicly traded company. Yeah.
Obviously, it's very hard to tell, right? Is it going to be 2019? Is it going to be 2020? I would like to think that 2019 is going to be really good. And then obviously you have the presidential election coming up in 2020. There's going to be a lot of unknowns. Will that make the market nervous? Will something pop up out of the blue that will affect? And that's probably what's going to happen, right? It's going to be something that we're not expecting that's going to pop up. But I'm hoping 2019 is strong, and I'll pick February 1st, 2020.
Brian, your job is forecasting. You have to.
Right.
You can do the hour.
Yeah, I think we'll start seeing, right. I think we'll start seeing chinks in the armor probably in the 2020 timeframe, but it won't really affect deliveries until 2022. There's always a little time lag before it affects deliveries. But I was asked the same thing at another Slido event, and while I feel 2020 we could start seeing effects, a smart audience like this, they thought it was closer to 2022, so slice it down the middle, pick your poison, but everyone thinks it's coming.
There's a question from the audience, which you guys can't see, but are we in danger of talking ourselves into the downturn? Are we in danger of talking ourselves into a downturn?
We're in a cyclical industry, so there's going to be one. It's just a matter of when. And that's okay. I don't think it's going to be a fall off the cliff like, the 08 time frame was. It should be something a little more subdued and more typical of downturns in the past.
Chris?
I don't think so. I think we just have to be realistic about, what the situation is that's out there and, conduct businesses that's appropriate to what the conditions are. But be mindful that, it's not going to expand forever.
Okay, we've got two very good questions. Someone's saying Don and Chris are realistic. You should be pleased with that. What are owners' most important requirements when deciding on which aircraft to purchase? Is it comfort, technology?
I think it depends on the customer, right? Everybody is different. Sometimes it's going to be the cabin. Sometimes it's going to be the DOCs. I don't think there's any one answer to that. And then obviously it depends on the type of aircraft as well.
I mean, obviously price point and finishing, fitting their mission is a big one, but connectivity and the 2020 is a big issue right now. Every buyer that we have looking into it, and every airplane that we buy for inventory, we try to make it as turnkey as possible in both those aspects. Those are key drivers right now.
I think for some of the customers that I've seen, not only what Chris and Neville said, but it's also an emotional decision for a lot of these people. And I've dealt with a number of people in this room with customers, and there's been iteration of what the equipment is that fits the mission that they have, and then they end up buying something that's completely none of those, but that's the one that they really like.
I see that mindset starting to change. Business aviation used to be, which model should I get? Well, what's my golfing buddy have? And I'll top that, get something farther and faster. But today it has to be more of a business justification. And clients aren't just looking at the price, the selling price of the airplane. They're looking at, long-term life cycle costs. What's this going to cost me down the road as a total package, and maybe leaning their decision more towards those results.
Okay. There's another question. It's amazing how pilotless aircraft is taking off. The noise around pilotless aircraft. Although obviously they're electric, so they should be less noisy. Given the speed at which the FAA is integrating UAVs into aerospace, is it overly optimistic that pilots could be out of a job in 10 or 15 years? Don?
It's possible. I mean, I obviously can't look completely into my crystal ball, but I certainly think if you look at, 50 years ago, if you said somebody's going to get on a train and there's going to be no conductor on it, people would have, scoffed at that. And now probably everybody in this room has been on the train in Orlando at some point that has no driver. I'm not even sure it has somebody in a control room somewhere. And things evolve. So whether it's 10, 15 years or 50 years, I think a lot of that is going to be driven by, how fast can the regulators adapt to what this new mode of transportation is going to be, or how good are we as an industry trying to fit what these new modes of transportation into a regulatory structure that probably is going to be very, very difficult to change in any short period of time.
And I think that's one of the interesting, when you talk to the people trying to launch the eVTOL, a lot of them have had early conversations with the FAA, but they're not doing, the daily problems that we see, really established OEMs have with getting certification or operating. And I think, it will be a tough many years ahead if you're an eVTOL manufacturer. And obviously Embraer knows this, but some of the startup ones.
Yeah, I'd say in our industry, at least 10 to 15 years is a little close, but I can tell you it's making progress in other areas. I have one client that's examining the market for a pilotless cargo aircraft, and that makes sense, before you start carrying people. Pilotless aircraft are being used in military areas with helicopters to deliver loads, so it's not that it's not being done, it's just in the military where the requirements aren't quite as tough. But I think as a pilotless aircraft moves towards moving people, look at Boeing and the airlines. There used to be 3 people in the cockpit, maybe 4, and that went to 3 and now 2. And it's conceivable that the next step will be 1, especially with airlines trying to lower costs and Boeing trying to sell more airplanes and a pilot shortage. So I think it's inevitable that it'll move that direction.
Do we have any old-fashioned, non-millennial questions from the audience? Someone who hasn't. We have got one at the back from a non-millennial. If anyone needs help downloading the app or logging onto the internet, we can do it at the back of the room.
Yeah, hi, Alex Fecto, marketing at Boeing. Given that the commercial market has and is forecasted to continue to grow air travel at more than 50% of GDP around the world, does the private market not mirror that? And even with the downturn, would it mirror that, or would you see a completely different dynamic going forward?
Brian?
I think commercial and private doesn't always move in sync, and a lot of your growth is being driven by emerging markets, which is a problem with our industry right now because they don't have funds to buy private aircraft like they used to. But to move the masses, that's justifiable, and they're rushing to fill in that void right now and buy more aircraft.
Is that a question?
This comes from an old geezer, non-millennial, previous century guy. In the aviation insurance world, we're seeing a tightening of the market and also a tightening of risk management practices to the point where it's conceivable that the insurance companies could once again become the driving force in who mans your cockpit and the training that they get. How are you addressing that? Are you seeing any problems now? Short term, I see a problem brewing, but I wanted to know if it's affecting you now, especially the operators and the smaller operators.
I guess from my perspective, I would welcome that. There's been so much capacity in the insurance market for so long that irrespective of if you have a safety program that's up here compared to in the middle, compared to no safety program whatsoever, it really didn't matter from the insurance provider's perspective. Maybe they said it did, but I can tell you when I look at the rates that were being written for the different operations that we compete with that are out there, it was virtually non-existent. So from my perspective, I would love to see an insurance market where it's being driven by what's the risk associated with the operations and not the capacity of the insurance market.
Follow up?
Any more old school questions? Okay, we have a few more on Slido. I think this is more of a comment, but keep in mind that aircraft being delivered today will be in service 30 to 40 years away, and they require pilots. Is the regulator a friend or an enemy of business aviation? look at the 1950s or going to the moon. I'm not quite sure about that bit, but
I mean, Textron right now, we're going through the certification of the longitude. We just finished FNR testing. We're now down to what they call the paperwork stage. So it's something you just have to get on with it, right? I think you have to work with the FAA, work with them to make it as quick as possible, but also as efficient as possible. So I think it's something you just have to accept.
friend. Don, are you prepared to stand on stage now and say the FAA is an enemy?
Absolutely not.
And knowing they'll be at your facility tomorrow.
No, but I will say in the past couple of years, we have seen some changes with the FAA from the way that they're organized to be more helpful in, the way that we're trying to operate as an industry. And you look at, some of the things that NBA is doing, some of the relationships that we have through NATA. If we identify things collectively and come up with a better way to do something that doesn't require a regulatory change, I think it's pretty easy to work with the, I'll take that back. It's reasonable to work with the FAA to accomplish those things. Where we get into, the long drawn out process is to change government regulations is extremely difficult. But to the extent that there's, written down policies that back up those regulations, the policies can be changed. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to know when we're approaching them, are we asking for, a change to some order or some policy that can be, done in a reasonable period of time, or are we asking to rewrite regulations that were written in the 1950s that, it's like pulling teeth to change?
Okay, last two questions. Chris, Michael Amalfitano discussed the growing importance of the experience, connectivity, and overall interface with aircraft. Are you seeing the same trend with service and support? Are customers looking for this across the board?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, it's almost it's a must or a demand that they have this in sync with their delivery of their pre-owned or new aircraft. It's always the second question that comes up: how do I connect? How do I get online? How do I connect to the screen? How do I work this? But it's all driving around that connectivity.
Okay. Clive Jackson from Victor has made a comment that basically in 10 years there's going to be pressure to retire aging fleets that consume hydrocarbon. Brian, I've got a nice question for you. Considering every major innovation comes from outside the traditional industry, computers, Uber, electric vehicles, etc., do you believe that aircraft OEMs are nimble enough to compete?
I think we see them making gains there now. Michael gave a nice presentation how they're trying to hitch their wagon to the urban air mobility movement. We see the Bell helicopter folks getting together with Safran and other, well-known providers. So I think we see them looking to the future and the need to diversify, and that's one growing area that they can put a couple chips and ride it if it takes off.
Great. Final question. Can you define the next 10 years of business aviation, looking at the trends, looking at the challenges, looking at the opportunities, in one word?
Growth.
Steady.
Technology.
I second that.
You can't second that. That's 3 words. So steady technology growth. The downturn is coming in 2020, according to 46% of people in the room. The 6% of you who said never, if you could meet me at the back, I've got some magic beans I'd like to sell you. And on that note, thank you very much.